China has responded to Trump administration's tariffs on $34 billion worth of goods with an equal amount of its own. Now, the U.S. is due to impose duties on another $16 billion worth of goods in 2 weeks' time. China has promised to respond in kind, bringing the value of trade affected on each side to $50 billion. Now, economists say if it stops there, okay, the economic damage may in fact be limited, but President Trump says he'll respond to the retaliation with a massive escalation of tariffs on up to, wait for it, $500 billion worth of Chinese goods. It'll be interesting to see what he does with that threat. China won't be able to match that, of course. It only imported $170 billion worth of American goods last year. But it's unlikely to go unanswered. Joining me now, Carla Hills served as the United States Trade Representative under President H.W. Bush, and I thank you for joining us. Many people will say that, look, the complaints about China are valid and very material. Considering the health of the U.S. economy, why not do this here and now and really open up a trade war which might actually settle something?
I worry that the trade war won't settle something, and I'd be much more in favor of trying to have a plan, a strategy for what we can do sitting down with China to work out our differences. It's tragic that we didn't join hands with our allies, Europe, Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, all of whom have the same complaints as we do against China, and sat at the table and said, okay, you agreed not to discriminate when you joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization. You agreed to give us national treatment. You're not doing that. Let's have a plan so you can get your economy on the right link so that you are a good member. And I don't think the tariffs are a way to do it.
Understood, Ambassador Hills, but the issue here is that the Trump administration is betting that any kind of incrementalism, even with the allies, will not work. And they think that this kind of maximum pressure tactic will. Can they win a trade war?
I don't think either side wins in a trade war. We're going to take a hit to our investors, our companies. You know, in your earlier segment, you showed the number of tariffs that will be applied to products coming into the United States from China. 60% of those are intermediate products that make our products that we produce more competitive globally, so that we will be less competitive in the world at large. This isn't a win-win. What we need to do is sit down and find a plan that will show how we can get China to abide by the rules that we think they agreed to.
And I want to talk to you about that, because I think the problem here seems to be when you speak to analysts or even some of the negotiators at the table, they do not see where that compromise exists right now. In your distinguished career as a trade representative, where do you think that exists in terms of where do you go forward from here?
China has to change its economic policy from strict investment and exports more to a service economy. It knows that. It's been trying gradually to do that since Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s, and it's leveled off. But China is worried about laying off workers from cement, steel, iron, you name it. And so the question is, how do they go about it? And we can sit and talk to them about it. I really think that being at the negotiating table, trying to understand what their difficulties are and having them understand what the pitfalls are if they don't move forward. You know, if the rest of the world were to stand up and confront China, it would be much more powerful than the United States doing it unilaterally. And in making it worse, we have brought iron or steel and aluminum tariffs against our closest allies, which under claiming national security. We really are worried that Canada is going to invade us, our largest importer of steel? I don't think so.
But if you allow me for a minute, the Trump administration will say to you, your negotiation in decades of negotiation here, nothing has worked. This might be for dramatic effect, and it might be a very good negotiating tactic.
The negotiations that we had with China actually did work. They lifted about 400 million people out of poverty, and China is today our third largest trading partner. behind Canada is #1 and Mexico the #2, so that we have millions of jobs connected with our trade with China. I think we want to keep the good news and get rid of the discrimination and the failure to give us national treatment.
Yeah, and you make such a good point in the fact that if we look at decades of trade here, and especially the way it's gone through the WTO, it is true. Livelihoods, it's been to the betterment of livelihoods around the world. And yet we are at this tipping point right now where we could be on the edge of a trade war. What do you think at the end of the day that it is going to take in order to get beyond here? Because the escalation that we just set out here at the top of our show, I mean, $500 billion, and everybody knows that they will take the president literally, that it's not a bluff on his part. He can and will do it.
I'm worried. I'm very worried that the path that they've chosen will not produce the outcome that we all want. And I think they have to sit down and get a strategy, understand well what are the problems that China feels that it's confronting, what do we want them to do, and again, I would join hands with my allies. It's shocking to me that China has joined with our allies to bring a case against us for claiming national security interests in restricting the entry of steel and aluminum. I mean, we built the World Trade Organization, and we've won 90% of the cases that we've brought. Why are we taking this?
It is such a good point, and China did do that, in fact, joining hands with what were traditional U.S. allies. But I want to ask you something. When it comes to WTO reform, again, doesn't the Trump administration have a point? And do they really think that they're going to get any kind of reform unless they take these drastic measures?
Well, if you talk about reform at the World Trade Organization, I would use the word modernize. We launched the World Trade Organization in 1994, and so much has changed in terms of our economy. We didn't have digital flows. We didn't have services that we have now. What we need to do is upgrade, modernize the World Trade Organization. We also need to help maintain the dispute settlement mechanism. That's what's helped us keep, for the last 40 years, peace and tranquility in the trade regime. People have abided by the rules. You know, we talk about rule of law. The World Trade Organization has rules of trade, which are the law of trade, and we want to keep those.
Yeah, and I guess the problem is some people just do not see that that is a balance worth keeping at this point in time, that the WTO as a referee has not worked. Ambassador Hills, thank you so much for all your time today. We will continue to cover this issue. It continues to escalate, seems every day. Appreciate it.
A pleasure to be with you.